But despite this slow burn, it does pull you through. It does make you want to watch more. Like I said, I'm desperate for episode 3, so I cannot wait to watch more. Now, the last section of my notes here, I just want to kind of, not that I want to compare it to Game of Thrones, and while I wouldn't say you shouldn't compare it to Game of Thrones, you definitely should, because I mean it is a spin-off series. I don't necessarily want to compare the two, because it's different showrunners, it's different writers, so comparing the two would kind of be unfair. That being said, it is kind of continuing on the legacy of Game of Thrones. Now, we all know that Game of Thrones dropped the ball massively near the end. Game of Thrones started off really good, and it just fizzled out. It didn't even fizzle out, it crashed and burned. And I still haven't been able to rewatch that series, and I like rewatching series. I've rewatched multiple series that I've seen in the past, but Game of Thrones I haven't been able to do that with, because I just can't make myself watch something when I know that the crash and burn is coming, and I know that it's just so painful. It's a series that I loved, and they kind of ruined it, so definitely a difficult pill for me to swallow there. That being said, Game of Thrones had a really solid start, and this show has a really solid start. If they can stick the landing, if they can make sure that the ending is good, if they can avoid the pitfalls that the previous series fell into, this could potentially, and now don't hold me to this, but this could potentially redeem the name of Game of Thrones. This could essentially, I don't want to say undo the damage, but it could definitely, in the eyes of the public and the eyes of the viewership, it could definitely kind of mitigate some of that fallout. And here's hoping. I would love for this series to do really well, and for there to be multiple other spin-offs, and for this to kind of create like a expansive world of series. I mean, Game of Thrones is kind of the fantasy series that started it all. You know, after Game of Thrones we had Wheel of Time, we had Witcher, we had this Lord of the Rings one, and multiple others that I can't even remember now. It was like the first one, you know. And while that is amazing, it is also technically something that kind of counts against it. Think about it. When Game of Thrones first came out, it gained mega popularity. Ugh, hold on guys, I see someone in the chat here, just give me a sec, getting rid of that. Alright, so like I said, when Game of Thrones first came out, it gained mega popularity because there wasn't another big fantasy show on the TV. You know, it was the only one out there, it was the only player in the game. But thankfully it was also a really good player, it was a really good show. Now, however, despite the brand recognition that this show has in terms of being a Game of Thrones spin-off, it does now have to compete with other fantasy shows. It's essentially competing for attention. It's competing with other fantasy shows, not necessarily in terms of quality, but in terms of viewership. Viewers now can find other shows that they prefer. Fantasy fans, people who like fantasy shows, might, like me, have been burnt by Game of Thrones and might just off the bat say, no, I'm not going to watch this, I'm enjoying, I don't know, XYZ. I honestly can't think of anything else that might be good right now, to be honest, but the point is, due to the fact that this is a different, it's different terrain, it's different circumstances and different competition. And if you think about it, the initial seasons of Game of Thrones came out before streaming was really a big thing. So now you have streaming services everywhere. People aren't necessarily waiting for the next Monday to sit in front of the TV with the family and watch Game of Thrones. Or I don't know if you guys saw it like that, but that's how I saw the initial series, at least the first like 2 seasons or so. That's not the landscape anymore. People are now streaming stuff constantly. People are watching what they want when they want. So it does have to contend with that. But if it can contend with that, if it can maintain quality, if it can stick the landing, and if it can continue with the level of grace and quality and the the high level of writing and acting that it currently has, just in this little sample, these 2 episodes, if it can maintain that, I have a feeling we have a massive hit on our hands. I have a feeling that this might be the start of a kind of a new renaissance in fantasy shows. Because, look, am I placing a bit too much stock on the first 2 episodes of a new series? Maybe. But the point I'm trying to make is, we all know that there's been a lot of fantasy series being attempted recently. And they all exist because Game of Thrones existed. They're all trying to be the next Game of Thrones, and none of them are really getting close. This one, being a spin-off of Game of Thrones and also having that quality, it is actually close. And if it can maintain the quality, if it can actually be that level of big, it'll set a standard. It'll set a new standard, because after Game of Thrones was gone, it kind of left a void and a lot of shows were trying to fill it. But if this is here and it sets a standard, it would force other shows to be as good. It would force other shows to look at it and be like, well, in order to compete, we have to at the very least do as well as they are doing. We have to have the same quality, we have to have good writing, we have to have good acting, good pacing, all of that. So we want this show to succeed, not just because we want a good Game of Thrones series and we want to kind of redeem the Game of Thrones name. We want it to succeed because it means that other shows will have to step up. There'll be no more void. There'll be the big guy and everyone trying to compete with that big guy. It's competition, and we need that, because currently what we've had so far, it's not working, guys. It's just not working. Nobody's enjoying the shows. I know I'm not. I haven't heard from anyone in the sphere who says like, oh, I'm really enjoying this show or that show, or ooh, have you seen the latest episode of XYZ? No, I don't hear that. And well, that tells me that all the shows are kind of mediocre. They're all like cash grabs. So we need this to succeed, not just to redeem the name of Game of Thrones, but we need it to succeed for the fantasy television series as a whole. For this whole genre of television or streaming or whatever you want to call it, we need something big to succeed. This has the brand recognition, this has the solid writing so far, this has the potential. So if this can succeed, then who knows? Maybe in future we could be looking at a very different landscape when it comes to streaming and fantasy series. But that's just my hopeful take on things.